So we'll do this together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I'm going to start with an opening question. Have you ever made a bargain that you regretted?
Hi.
Hi. So you just joined in time for the opening question, which no one has answered yet. So you're going to hear it along with. And that is, have you ever made a bargain you regretted? Yeah, you're the second person with a outburst of laughter to that. Any thoughts?
Well, you're not starting with me.
This is a volunteer program.
Oh, it's volunteer. Okay. I'll let someone else volunteer.
So my answer is yes, but not something that I really want to share with my HBT colleagues.
Fair enough.
But yes, definitely there have been some significant bargains that I regretted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I suppose getting a divorce could be, sad to say, but that's the first thing. That's what really sticks in my mind. But I don't feel, believe me, I tried to keep my bargain as much as humanly possible, and I was very young. So but Jewishly, I got a get, which is not something it's people who know a lot about Jewish ritual. Have you experienced this? Have you done this or that? I did have a get, which is a very interesting process, to go through. And so that gave a sense of evening things out to me.
And
I had to fight for it. I had to make it condition of the divorce for him to give me a get. This was, been a long time ago. So
and just to clarify, Nomi, was it the get and the process of going through that was the bargain, or was it the marriage going in that was the bargain?
that was a bargain. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was ready to walk, but I felt like I had to go through. I was very stupid, and I shouldn't going through something where I was really having a lot of second doubt, second thoughts about it.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to break a bargain, and that was how I viewed it.
I hear you. All right. Thank you for your candor on that.
Mm.
Go ahead, Merle. You were just about to say something.
I was going to say I didn't regret the divorce at all. I didn't regret the marriage, and I didn't regret the divorce.
Well, that's perfect harmony right there.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
each was right in its own time.
Right.
And it also sets your life in something like that, which is a major bargain, getting married. It does put, whether it works out or not, it has to do with moving geographical locations and so many things that you keep thinking, well, if I hadn't had this experience, these other positive experiences wouldn't have happened. So that's how I've always tried to view it.
Yeah. Sounds like a great attitude.
Yeah. And I think it's, Judaism, I really appreciate that, again, as an option, unless you're become an aguna, is that the word? An abandoned, pardon?
It's chained, and
Yeah, if
you can't get it. Or he
as
won't give
long as they agree. Now it's part of the ketubah for most conservative marriage contracts, that it's at the conservative couples that they have it added in to their ketubah that if the wife asks for a get, he will give it to her. And I guess if he says no at the time, they can go back to the contract. So it's beautifully illustrated things on the wall. It says right there, I will give my wife a get if she asks for one. So
Wow.
I was involved with union negotiation as management, and we had to break the contract, because if we didn't break the contract, the old contract would still be in force. So we decided to lock the union out for a day. Well, it landed up in a 60-day strike, which almost destroyed 4 of the major Jewish schools in Montreal. We locked out the day before Pesach. We came back about June the 10th. So you can imagine that was pretty regretful. But we were following legal advice.
I realize that that was not the easiest of opening questions to throw out to the group, so I thank those who've been kind of willing to go forward. I will say that on my own end, I can think of I can't think of the specifics, but I know I was constantly making bargains with my kids that I regretted. It's like, why, did I actually put that in writing? Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a quick overview of the Parsha, right? So we're starting the book of Exodus. And we've got the first chapter, right? This is the book Shemot, the book of names. And it begins with names, the names of Jacob and his family who came down to Egypt. That generation dies out. A new Pharaoh arises who doesn't know Joseph. And the Israelites, in an incredibly quick sequence of like 10 sentences at the beginning of the Parsha, become disfavored and descend into brutal slavery. And we're not going to unpack that, but it has amazing parallels to some of the othering of immigrants that we are seeing around the world. Pharaoh decrees that all Hebrew males be killed at birth. The midwives refused to follow the order in an act of civil disobedience. Pharaoh renews the decree, calling for all Hebrew boys to be thrown in the Nile upon birth. Moshe is born and hidden for the first 3 months of his life. When he's too old for that to work, his mother puts him in a pitch-lined basket in the reeds of the Nile. He gets discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, and Miriam steps forward to say that she knows a Hebrew nurse who can help raise the child. He's raised in Pharaoh's household. Moshe goes out as he grows up. He goes out amongst his people. He sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew. He kills the Egyptian. When Pharaoh hears of this, he seeks to kill Moshe. Moshe escapes. He flees to Midian, where he meets the daughters of Jethro by a well, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He ends up marrying Jethro's daughter, Tzipporah, and settles into life as a shepherd. Moshe is tending his sheep, and he sees God in a burning bush. God reveals to Moshe that he is to be the Redeemer, the deliverer of the Israelites from the Egyptian slavery. It takes a whole chapter of arm twisting by God to get Moshe to take on this mission. He does not have the words to be a spokesman. God finally allows that Aaron will be his partner and spokesman. Only then does Moshe relent and agree. And we will come back to the Parsha momentarily. In liturgical time, as we always do in winter, as the sun is climbing out of its lowest point of the solstice, the Torah narrative reaches the story of the birth of the Jewish people out of slavery. Shemot is the beginning of a sequence of 8 parshiot known by the acronym Shovavim Tat. That acronym is for the first 8 parshiot, and it means, actually, it's not just an acronym, it means restless little ones. And it's apropos of the period of the year when fragile children would succumb to illness. Next Thursday will be the new moon for the month of Shabbat. And so I was doing the summary of the Parsha, and I stopped right before what is one of the strangest 3 sentences in the whole of the Torah. And I sent out something to folks to say, read the Parsha, find the strangest 3 sentences, because that's what we're going to talk about. And I don't know if you had a chance to do it, but if you did, Merle, you did, what sentences did you focus on?
24 to 26.
24 to 26.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so it's totally crazy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen, Exodus 4, 18 through 26. I'm just going to read it because we got a lot of stuff to get through tonight. Moshe went back to his father-in-law, Jethro, who's got like 8 different names in the Torah for some reason, and said to him, let me go back to my kinfolk in Egypt and see how they are faring. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Adonai said to Moshe in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all those who sought to kill you are dead. So Moshe took his wife and sons, mounted them on an ass, and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moshe took the rod of God with him. And Adonai said to Moshe, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I have put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says Adonai, Israel is my firstborn son. I've said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me. Yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. So there's this whole premonition of what's going to happen in the slaying of the firstborn. And then the 3 sentences. At a night encampment on the way, Adonai encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his legs with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." And when God let him alone, she added, "A bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision." Okay. You must
If
have.
this document wasn't handwritten, I would have said it's a copy and paste error.
Yeah. Right. It's just totally strange. So there's lots of questions that could arise, and I'm just wondering, as we read these 3 sentences, what questions do you have?
First thing, I didn't know who him was. I thought
Yes,
talking about Moses. I didn't know.
the pronoun him, it's not clear. And who are what are the possibilities for him?
At first, I thought it was Moses.
Could be Moshe. Who else could it be?
That the 2 sons.
There's 2 sons. It could have been one of the 2 sons. So we don't know if it's Moshe. We don't know if it's a son. Okay, what else is questionable here?
Why she did it, not Moses.
Okay, you got Zipporah being the circumcisionist.
Right.
Okay, what else?
And why does even God want to kill whoever the he is? Why does God want to kill the he?
Certainly if it's Moshe, it's like totally bizarre. Moshe's on a mission from God, as they said in the Blues Brothers. And now all of a sudden, God wants to kill him. What's that about? What does this bridegroom of blood mean?
Why
Right.
the foreskin touching his leg? I presume leg is a euphemism for the penis, but what is that about?
Okay, so the touching the leg. And yes, you're right. Some rabbinic sources say it's a euphemism for the
Yeah.
genitals. Go ahead, Nomi.
No, I was thinking about the leg as maybe the blood was supposed to be seen, because there's such a big thing about taking the drop of blood. I know circumcisions within certain communities.
Hmm.
And I know if somebody is circumcised, but then converts to Judaism, they still have to go through a drop of blood. Yeah.
Okay. By the way, it's not clear whose legs are touched. In the same way, it's not clear who's sought to be killed, right? We don't know quite about that either.
I think there's a case to be made for it being Moshe, that she was making a point, possibly that Moshe had not followed through and circumcised Gershon himself. So when she circumcised her son, she took their son's foreskin and touched her husband's leg with it to leave the stain of blood there, to say, I did it, but here it is, and I just I did your duty for you. Like even putting the blood on him was saying, okay, now I was your proxy, but here's your son's blood on you.
Let me throw out one more, which is the repetition of the phrase bridegroom of blood. I mean, what's the meaning of the repetition of that? Oh, and by the way, there's one other thing. Why is Zipporah's response to pull out a flint and circumcise? I mean, there's this threat, and Adonai seeks to kill, but why is I know the answer. Let's circumcise somebody. It's like,
yeah, because if her husband has not kept his oath to God, which we're assuming, I don't know if I don't know if at any time, I don't remember, God has said you have to circumcise Gershon or not, but I would assume she's thinking in her head, someone's threatening my husband, father of my children. I'm going to protect him from a bargain that he didn't keep, and keep that bargain for him.
well,
And give him credit for it, because I'm going to let the blood be on his leg.
David.
One thing we haven't mentioned so far is that it's at night, and I think that that's curious. Why is it important that it's at night? Night is a time when, first of all, things can be confused. We have dreams we don't know the meaning of. There are plenty of dreams that affect this family. Night is a time where you don't know someone's identity, and the action that Zipporah takes here is to clarify the identity of the person involved, just as in the Passover, will be the time when Jews need to declare their identity in blood in order to be spared their fate. So this whole idea of it being at night and needing to identify what is the relationship between the person and the person in question and God or their Jewishness.
Wonderful connections, David. And the fact that this presages the terrible night of the 10th plague, with blood being the thing that wards it off and night being the time of fear. Wonderful connections. Yes, Debbie.
I just want to ask a question. How do we know that Moshe was circumcised?
That is such a great question, because it is possible that Moshe is the person who was not circumcised.
Right.
So I guess if circumcision was the thing that was performed on the 8th day, maybe it's likely that Moshe was circumcised on the 8th day by his parents, because they didn't hide him until he was several months old. But it is a good question. And there are some rabbis who say, is it possible that Moshe was not circumcised?
Circumcision is the sign of the covenant between the Jewish people or the child and God.
Yes.
This child, or whoever the he is, wasn't in the covenant and had to be brought in.
Yes. Rich, go ahead. You had your hand up and then we'll go.
You would think if the Lord sought to kill somebody, the Lord could do it. So that's sort of a curious phrase as well. And I'm not.
I guess it communicates the threat, which leaves a space for Tzipporah to maybe stop it. But move us along. I think you've identified great questions. And obviously in any kind of situation like this, Midrash comes in to fill in. First of all, just in terms of where are the commentators on these questions, they're all over the place. Rashi says that the angel sought to kill Moses, and Sephorno agrees. Ibn Ezra says, perish the thought that God would seek to slay Moses after sending him on the mission. It was rather Eliezer, his son, that God sought to slay, and it's to Eliezer that the references meet him and slay him refer. Rabbeinu Bachya adds another one. According to the Midrash, how is it that Tzipporah performed the circumcision? And people have commented on that. Surely if Moses had been at the inn, he would have done it. And so Rabbeinu Bachya says Moshe was not at the inn, because if you read, it says that Moshe put his wife and his sons on the ass and sent them along, and he walked along with the staff of God. So they actually ended up arriving at the inn ahead, which is why Moshe, in Rabbeinu Bachya's reading, was not the one to perform the circumcision. And on the answer to the question of how is it that Tzipporah knew that circumcision was the problem, and we're going to talk about the fact that there was a lot of ambiguity there, here's what Rabbeinu Bachya says, and this is when you get this kind of midrash, people are at a loss. When the Torah wrote of the angel he wanted to kill him, the angel assumed the shape of a snake, devouring the upper half of the baby's body down to the area where the circumcision would have occurred. Then the snake spit out the baby and started to devour him from his feet upwards, stopping at the same area as previously. At that point, Tzipporah, realizing what the problem was, seized a sharp piece of flint and performed the act of circumcision. She had understood that the whole phenomenon was punishment for not circumcising this infant on the 8th day after its birth.
Ooh, okay.
It's ridiculous, right? They're trying to fill in with this fantastical, baby-eating snake. But one of the things that's really interesting is that we only know this in retrospect, but this scene at the inn is pretty much the last substantive appearance by Tzipporah in the Torah. She's gone after this. She's going to appear in one other place, and we're going to go to that place, but it's pretty much, a dramatic break. But she definitely goes out with a bang. What I want to do is I want to go to another section here, which is the original meeting of Moshe and Tzipporah. Like, how did they end up getting married? So just as a refresher, right? You all can see the screen here, Exodus 2:15-21. Moshe kills the taskmaster. Pharaoh learns of the matter. He sought to kill Moses. Moses fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. How often does the husband meet his wife at the well, right? Lots. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water the father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moshe rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, yet another name for Jethro, he said, "How is it that you've come back so soon today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to break bread." Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife. We are not talking the romantic courtship of Jacob and Rachel. That's the story, and that's how they get together. I guess the question is, what do we know about Zipporah from this meeting story?
She obeys her father.
Okay, she obeys her father. We don't know much. Here's a midrash. The midrash says, when the daughters of Jethro returned home, they told their father that a stranger had saved them from the shepherds, and he asked them, "Why did you leave the man? Ask him to break bread." With the words "to break bread," implying marriage, Jethro hinted that Moshe might marry one of them. Upon hearing her father, Zipporah immediately ran after Moses like a bird. Kitzipor. Tzipor is Hebrew for bird, i.e. with alacrity. This is from Exodus Rabbah, the Midrash. So this Midrash casts Zipporah as the initiator, acting on her desire to achieve her goal. So it's so interesting that you say, Nomi, well, gee, isn't that what Zipporah would do? And the Midrash fills in exactly with that. I want to give you two more Midrashim just to give a sense of this vacuum of their meeting story. So the second Midrash has Jethro deciding upon Zipporah's marriage to Moshe after he brought Moshe into his home and came to know his qualities. Jethro was one of the magicians of Egypt. Remember, Pharaoh's surrounded by these magicians that can turn staffs into snakes. When he saw Pharaoh's staff with its magical symbols, he desired it and took it. He planted the staff in the garden of his house, and no man could approach it. When Jethro invited Moshe into his house, Moshe entered the garden and saw the staff. He read the symbols on it, extended his hand, and took it. When Jethro saw what Moses had done, he explained, "This one will redeem Israel from Egypt," and therefore gave him his daughter Zipporah in marriage. Here's another one. In this third tradition, the initiative to marry Zipporah came from Moshe. When he was with Jethro, he saw how fine were her actions. He went to Jethro and said, "Give me your daughter Zipporah in marriage." Jethro replied, "Do you want to do to me what your ancestor Jacob did? When Laban gave him his daughters, Jacob deceived him and fled far away. If you are asking me to give you Zipporah, swear to me that you will not take her far away from me. I will give her to you only upon this condition." And because of this pledge, Moshe had to return to Midian after he was sent to Egypt to be released from this vow. One final midrash. Jethro agreed to the marriage between Moshe and Zipporah on the condition that their firstborn would be an idolater, i.e. not circumcised.
There you go.
There you go.
There
Exactly,
you go.
Debbie. That's the connection. So what I want to do is I want to continue on with the narrative. So we have this incident at the inn, and then Moshe resumes the journey, and he meets up with Aaron, and they begin their mission. And this is like literally the sentences right after this. And the Zipporah and the children are gone. And they leave the scene, but we don't know how or why they've left the scene. So Rashi fills in with something, and I just want to. So God says to him in 4:19-20, "Go return to Egypt." Moshe took his wife and sons, etc. And Aaron went towards him and met him at the Mount of God. And Aaron said to him, "Who are these?" And Moshe answers him, "This is my wife, whom I married in Midian, and these are my children." Aaron thereupon asked him, "Whither are you taking them?" He replied, "To Egypt." Whereupon Aaron said to him, "We have cause to grieve over the former ones," i.e. the Israelites who are already there, "and you propose to add to their number?" Moshe therefore said to his wife, "Return to your father's house." And she took her two sons and went away. Okay, so right after this story, Zipporah disappears. The Midrash fills in with Aaron saying to Moshe, "What are you doing bringing more Jews, more Israelites to Egypt? There's enough suffering." Okay, so now we're going to go to the next episode, This is the last place where Tzipporah is mentioned in the Torah.
Yeah.
So this is chapter 18, the beginning of Parshat Yitro. So Jethro actually has a parsha named for him, and they are just about to get the Torah on Mount Sinai. So Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moshe and for Israel. So this is right after the Exodus, right? The splitting of the Red Sea, all the miracles. And Jethro hears about it, and he comes to visit. So Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, and you keep hearing Moshe's father-in-law, right? This is to emphasize what a personage Moshe has become. Took Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, after she had been sent home, and we just did the midrash about how she got sent home, and her two sons, one named Gershom, as to say, I've been a stranger in a foreign land, the other Eliezer, God is my help, delivering me from the sword of Pharaoh. So Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, third time, brought Moshe's sons and wife to him in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moshe, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. Moshe went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Moshe then recounted to his father-in-law everything that Adonai had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how Adonai had delivered them. What do you make of this? What is striking about this?
He doesn't speak to his wife. He's busy
Right.
going on, not with his wife and children.
Can you believe it?
No.
They come, they visit, they haven't been around, and all he can do is talk to his father-in-law, completely ignoring his wife and kids. And so how do you explain that?
I hate to say it, but most of the men in the Bible are not great husbands and are not great fathers. Think of one the only one who really loved his wife was Isaac, and Jacob loved Rachel. But otherwise, you don't. Moses pimps his wife. There's all kinds of stories there.
Abraham,
right?
Yeah. I mean, they're not exactly model husbands.
Isaac is a father. Jacob is. Both of them as fathers leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah. Why do you think there's this intense connection between Moshe and Yitro?
Because I think Yitro was a leader of his people, and Moses was looking
Mentorship.
mentor.
That's good. That's a good point. Anything else?
Well, Moshe, it seems that when he was a baby, and it was Miriam that watched over him, and Pharaoh's daughter that watched over him. So we don't know if Amram is around or not.
Very good. Moshe does not know his father.
Yeah, right. And this is a father-in-law and that kind of thing. In terms of not saying anything to his wife or children, I don't know if that's I'm not positive about that, because I think that wife and saying hello to your wife and children maybe is sort of assumed to that you're going to say hello to your wife and children, or maybe it's assumed so it's not mentioned. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to make excuses. I don't know.
Well, it's nice that you're being Moshe's publicist, but I would say, but it is interesting that you have to read it in. And it's this constant, Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, I think much is being made of that connection. And your point, Naomi, that he probably never knew Amram. He did not know his father. And, in addition to the mentorship, there's just the straight up father figure.
Take Moses as a father. He really shepherds Joshua, not his own sons, into leadership. So I don't know what kind of father he was.
Yeah.
Well, that could be because he knew he had to decide who would be best at.
No, I understand, but the whole fatherhood,
Yeah. Debbie.
I just wanted to say, think about think about the structure of the Torah. Think about who is dominant in telling the narrative, from whose perspective. And I think that answers all your questions.
Yeah.
And the only time women become agency is when they're desperate for a leader. When there's something, the men have disappeared, the men have gone, whatever it is. But beneath all of that is that they have left out that agency of women.
Just to pick up on that point, this Parsha is probably the most extreme example of women who are heroes, sheroes of the story, who have these brief walk-ons and then disappear, right?
Exactly.
You've got the midwives,
Right.
you've got Miriam, you've got Sipporah, there's another one that I'm forgetting. Pharaoh's, they're all gone, and so these brief walk-ons really do take you back to kind of who the narrator is. But Merle, your point that the mentorship that actually happens is with Joshua, I think is really illustrative of Moshe is focused on his leadership role and not his father role. That's what mattered to him. At least that's what I deduced from the text. So Rich, what were you going to say?
Well, just a small point, just to further support that point of view, is that in the passage, the children are referred to as her children, not his children. And that was pretty curious, because I don't think that's typically how children are referred to in the Bible. They're usually referred to as the father's children, the woman's.
That's a nice pickup. Thank you for pointing that out, referred to as her children. So I want to go back to those 3 sentences and all this ambiguity that's in there. And just to note that as a narrative device, this is happening at night. It's confusing. It's not clear who's being attacked, right? So the narrative is really set up to heighten this sense of confusion. And not only that, but it's, we know that maybe it's about the failure to circumcise the child. And we know that the lack of circumcision of the child, according to the Midrash, is potentially the condition that allowed Moshe to marry Tzipporah. Maybe she's feeling guilty about the fact that she has set up the condition that puts the child or her husband at risk of death. And then also there's another Midrash that there's concern on Tzipporah's part that Moshe married a Midianite woman. Maybe that was the problem, right? So there's just all this confusion. She's potentially blaming herself. And by the way, another strand that I've read is that this is Moshe's belated punishment for murdering the Egyptian taskmaster, which never was kind of dealt with.
Oh, no, it's not.
So, I'm sorry, did someone just say something?
I said, no, it's not.
Yeah, I don't think
Oh,
so.
but, yeah,
I figured I'd throw that out there, just,
Yeah.
So,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, maybe the punishment wasn't severe enough, but he was effectively exiled from the palace. Like, that's a punishment,
Right,
not a just one.
right. So I want to point out something very interesting, and it's in verse 25. Zipporah took a flint, cut off her son's foreskin. She touched it to his legs and said, "Indeed, a bridegroom of blood are you to me." Okay, there's 4 verbs in this sentence. Vatikach is to take. Zipporah took. Tzor is the flint. Vatichrot, she circumcised the foreskin of her son. Vataga leraglav, which is translated, touched it to his legs. And Merle I think it was Merle who said, is it legs or is it a pseudonym for genitals? But vataga, and then finally vatomer, she said, you are the bridegroom of blood. Vataga is the one ambiguous verb there. And to give you a sense of the ambiguity of it, most of the translations are touched, but Rashi says that vataga means she cast it at his feet. She threw the foreskin at his feet. And so my question for you is, what is the state of mind of Zipporah that would have her throw the foreskin at Moshe's feet?
Anger.
Anger. Okay, well, that's one possibility. Is there another possibility? We'll pursue the anger line of argument. What's another possibility?
Well, she's responding to the threat to her husband. She's trying to do some kind of act of penance that either her husband can't do or didn't do or something, but she's a mother and a wife, and she's trying to keep her family intact. And if she threw it, maybe she's a little angry that she had to take the initiative.
Okay,
There's something interesting in my book here.
Yeah.
Where it talks about Hebrew, the Chatan, which is bridegroom, means protect in Akkadian and Arabic and circumcise in Arabic.
Isn't that amazing? Yes, there is.
Yeah.
There is a strand there that says Chatan means circumcise in Arabic.
Yeah.
By the way, the in is a malon,
Yes,
milah, brit milah.
yeah.
And so there's linguistic tie between the inn they stayed at and the circumcision. So there's so many kind of weird things going on here and things to draw. I want to go back to what Nomi was saying. So I think anger is definitely a possible emotion. And I think the other possibility is that Zipporah is acting out of love for her husband, love for her son, fear of the whole thing. And it could be just in the catharsis of the moment.
It's also respect for Judaism.
I'm sorry?
It's also respect for Judaism.
I guess, I mean, the throwing of the foreskin.
No, the circumcision itself is saying that she's really a Jew now. She's really doing what she did. So it's really a Jewish marriage.
Yeah, well, she's in on the mission in a way, right? We are
Yes.
bridegroom of blood. We are joined by a blood ceremony. You're joined to be by the covenant. So that's certainly one reading of it. But here's what I want to.
You didn't finish what you were saying, Rich. Would you finish what you were saying? You never
Yeah.
you said it could be, and then you.
Oh, so I
didn't-
just think, yeah, I mean, I'm saying that there's the anger piece that I want to kind of pursue for a second, in a second, but I think I could imagine in the catharsis of the moment that it's just all so intense that, she's cut it off and she's holding this foreskin and she just, throws it because the whole thing is kind of, I don't know, overwhelming her. So maybe it's just kind of a sign of overwhelm.
There's
But
also,
maybe rather than being overwhelmed, maybe it's just to make the point of what she did.
Yeah.
Is to, to throw it wherever she throw it. That's a little ambiguous where she actually throws it, but just to make that point, hey, I did this and, here it is, not necessarily in anger, but just to, kind of emphasize the point of what,
Behold,
yeah, here, look what I just did.
right,
Right.
exactly. She's trying to say, I mean, when you put it up on the screen, so I went and found it in my Humash, in verse 23, right before that section 24, we don't know what, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it has nothing to do with it. But all I know is I saw the words, I will kill your son, your firstborn. And I'm just saying that it is right up there. Those are the last words of verse 23 before you go to 24. There's something that makes Zipporah afraid for her children and possibly her husband too, but she's really afraid for her child.
Right.
So she takes action and
Yes.
she wants people to see what she did.
So what I'd like to do is, there is one other place that Zipporah ends up appearing, not in the Torah, but in Midrash. Does anybody know or have a recollection of the episode of the Torah that is tied to Zipporah? Yes, Merle.
I think when they rebel against Moses, they say, you married a Cushite.
The Cushite woman.
Yes.
That is correct. Very good, Merle. So
I was always, is Midian and I thought there was different areas.
they are. They
North-
are. And the fact that the Cushite woman is understood to be Zipporah is not because she's from Cush, you're right, that's Ethiopia or whatever. There's all sorts of rabbinic ink spilled on, in what sense was she a Cushite, which I'm not going to sort of spend a lot of time on, but let's take as a given that she is identified as the Cushite woman. Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe because of the Cushite woman he had taken into his household as his wife. He took a Cushite woman. They said, has Adonai spoken through Moses, only through Moses? Has God not spoken through us as well? Adonai heard it. Okay, so Rashi comments on this, saying that God has spoken through us, Rashi's comment, and we have not separated from our spouses. And so Aaron and Miriam are slandering Moshe, basically saying, you don't have to be a celibate to be a prophet. Okay, so then the question is, how do they know about this estrangement? And so there's a Rashi on the second sentence, Miriam and Aaron spoke. And how did Miriam know that Moshe had separated himself from his wife? And this is separated in the sense of not having relations.
Okay.
Now, you might say, well, look, was Tzipporah even around? Maybe she wasn't around and she was in Midian while they were wandering through the desert, and that's how she knew they were separated. So this midrash is a little bit complicated. But Old Midrash, Miriam was beside Tzipporah when it was told to Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. So this is the previous chapter in 11 of Numbers. There's this story about Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. When Tzipporah heard this, she exclaimed, woe to the wives of these, if they have anything to do with prophecy, for they will separate from their wives, just as my husband has separated from me. It was from this that Miriam knew about it, and she told it to Aaron. And so this is an amazing midrash, a window into their marriage. And clearly the tone of it is bitterness from Tzipporah. And so, Merle, when you first identified the casting of the foreskin as an act of anger, it's hard for me to read this phrase. I know that there's love between this couple, and I know this is at the beginning of their journey, but I feel also maybe Tzipporah has sort of understood that Moshe is married to the mission, not to her. And this, you're a bridegroom of blood, right? It's like you've married the covenant, right? You've married the mission. And I feel like maybe she is divining for the first time that Moshe is not going to be a husband to her or a father to the children. There's an interesting midrash that Chizkuni brings, which is, here's what Chizkuni says about this whole situation. He should have circumcised his son and left him with his mother in Midian. This would have enabled him to carry out the mission entrusted to him by God without delay and without holdups due to consideration of the needs of his family. Instead, he had walked slowly while his family was riding. So here's Moshe. He's on the horns of a dilemma. He's been given orders to redeem the Israelites. He knows he's supposed to circumcise his son on the 8th day. And an obvious solution, which is leave the wife and kids at home while you're going on this big mission and let that happen. He's not able to do that. He can't parse through the different commandments. He's kind of doing them all at the same time. And, he's forgetting sort of key obligations. And yet at the same time, he's doing it while he's trying to keep his family intact. So I don't know how to read this situation, but there's part of it that says to me that he's so zealous. And that's a thing about Moshe. He's got anger issues. He's a zealot. He doesn't balance well. This, to me, is sort of a contrived crisis that was created because he couldn't see straight, I guess is the way I read it. I don't know what your thoughts are about that. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you said, and I think it's a very insightful interpretation. I'm also wondering, Now I know that I know how the Midrash on this goes differently from what I'm about to say. But when God has so much trouble convincing Moshe to take on the task, right?
yeah.
And there too, you might be seeing, some of that hesitate. I know part of it is, I'm too humble and, but it may also be very real. That is, he has just the very ambivalence you're talking about. And that's kind of a very, I think it's a very sympathetic portrait of Moshe.
Yeah.
I have never liked Moshe. I find him a whiner. I thought he was, but when I reread this time, I had a very different approach. I will say this. I don't think Moshe is the brightest bulb on the tree.
Interesting.
I think there's a good reason for that.
Yeah.
And part of that is that I think this emotion plays a bigger part in his life, right? I mean, you describe him as a zealot. I would not have necessarily said zealot, but I think that emotional part of him, rather than the kind of intellectual, analytic, think through, the kind of thing that a leader really does need, doesn't come naturally to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that ties into what you said. I think that's another way of interpreting.
Yeah. I think Moshe is a really complicated guy, and
Yeah.
when all's said and done, the Midrash kind of lauds him, and sometimes you look at what he does and you go, oh, yeah, Merle, go ahead.
He's a real servant of God. I mean, he didn't do this on his own. He's the instrument that God uses.
Right.
So I'm not surprised that he's not a leader on his own.
No.
Right. And he, God knows, he had a tough task, right?
Yeah.
He had an incredibly tough task, and he kind of pulled the people through as kind of both a spiritual leader, a general, holding it together after the golden calf incident, where, he slays 3,000 people or commands the slaying. I mean, anyway, so I guess I'd like to sort of move us, draw us a little bit towards closure. And I think one of the things I wanted to point out was the narrative device of her repeating Bridegroom of Blood really invites us to interpret this in so many different ways. So the fact that we're sitting here and speculating about, is it an act of anger? Is it an act of love? What is she saying? What was her motivation? And I do think that this passage is about all these things at the same time. The imperative to follow God's law, balance competing obligations, her guilt over her role in this dangerous situation. Perhaps she divines that it's the end of the marriage as she knows it. Maybe this is her parting act to show Moshe that she's doing her part in the mission, his partner in bloody liberation, a final reclaiming of agency before she's shunted off to the side, a reminder to Moshe not to be rigid, find a middle path of balance that's there if you have the patience to look. So her valor to step into the unknown and save the situation, it could have been the inauguration of a lifelong partnership with Moshe. Instead, it adds a layer of meaning to her bird name because this is her swan song. Apologies on that.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
give you that.
Let me add that. Thank you. So the book of Exodus, it is, as I was saying before, it's this amazing parsha that's full of women of agency and valor, and they appear only for brief moments, but they play these critical roles in Moshe's survival. Moshe would not have made it through without these women. And again, midwives, Shifra and Puah, he would be dead if they had not done their civil disobedience. Moshe's sister Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter, and Zipporah. And we celebrate the actions, and yet at the same time, we know that there are millions of women who, though absent from the record, shaped history's course with their love and action. And may we recognize them as equal partners in our day and understand in the old turn of phrase that his story is her story as well. I'll
tell you something, as a mother of 3 boys,
Yeah.
could have never, ever, ever taken a flint and circumcised them. Never.
That's it, huh?
I couldn't either. I could never, ever imagine myself ever doing that even. I mean, I suppose, mothers of, like kids who are diagnosed with juvenile diabetes have to get themselves over that hurdle of pricking their child and giving them injections and all that. And I can't imagine how difficult that must be. But when I was reading that, I was thinking, if she thought it was a life or death issue, that would be the only way she probably could have brought herself to do that.
That's true. Merle, if you're in that position, maybe we.
I don't know. I don't know. I had a very premature grandson, and when he got to 5 pounds, he had to be circumcised, and I was cringing. You know how small it was?
Yeah,
No, and, this kid had fought his way and was fine, and they went after him with a knife and this tiny little penis. It was
Hey.
painful.
But it was this day and age, so
Yeah,
I know they use numbing agents and then you get
I know.
a lidocaine injection. So
By the way, that young man is now going to be 26, and he's wonderful.
Good.
Yeah.
Happy ending.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, these
listen.
endings, these.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to make a facetious comment, but we're not going to get to Eye, Asher, Eye. We're not going to get to that.
There's so
Oh,
much in
I'm
this.
so disappointed.
I know.
there's so much in that.
It's
Yeah.
the whole identity story. I
I
think
know.
it's so important.
I know.
Are you going to
Another-
do are you going to do Torah study on Saturday too?
No.
Okay, because originally there was supposed to be one on Saturday.
It was going to maybe be one, but I think that a couple of things were going on. I think what I've heard is that Rabbi Pensner is going to be there. And I think we didn't want to be in a situation where we were limiting the attendance at services because some people might go to Torah study and not both. So anyway,
Okay.
so we did a little Thursday night.
We're doing Jupiter, so I hope
We
everyone.
are.
Right. Craig, you're going to run that, right?
Yes.
Craig is doing, Craig and Tammy.
Tammy. Don't forget-
Excellent. All right.
That's a team.
That
That's
is
a
a team.
true marriage. They're really a team.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thanks everyone for joining. It was great to
Okay,
talk
thank you.
together. Okay, take care.
Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
Isla Tov.
Lila
Lila
Tov,
Tov.
Bye.
and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.